economic development, policy decisions and market trends influencing Nigeria and the broader African continent. I am your host, Wang Fonabasi Walter. Here is what we are retracking for you today. Morocco becomes Africa's most reliable hub for U.S. wheat import. Somalia suspends UAE defense and port deals over Somaliland recognition rule. Mozambique's $100 million seafood industry crashes as Spanish investor announces exit. We also look at 10 African nations with the highest inflation in 2025. Let's begin with the currency market, particularly the US dollar against some African currencies. The US dollar Nigerian Naira exchange rate fell to 1,422 with a percentage of 0.13. The US dollars against the South African rand pegs at 16 rand per US dollar, with a percentage of 0.43. The US dollars against the Zambian kwacha rise to 19 kwacha, up to 0.19%. The US dollars against Egyptian pound is at 47 pound, with a percentage of 0.11. The value there is quite low. The US dollars against the Algerian dinar is at 130 dinar per US dollars. And the US dollars against the Angolan kwanza is at 923 kwanza per US dollar, with a percentage of 0.56. Africa, where Somalia has cancelled all agreements with the United Arab Emirates, citing what it described as strong evidence that Abu Dhabi was involved in actions undermining the country's sovereignty and unity following Israel's recognition of Somaliland, the self-declared breakaway region. A statement issued by the Somalia's Council of Ministers said it had annulled every agreement signed with the UAE, including those involving federal institutions, affiliated entities and regional administrations. The decision covers bilateral security and defense cooperation, as well as commercial and port agreements linked to Berbera, Basaso and Kismayo, three of Somalia's most strategically important ports. Meanwhile, at the heart of this diplomatic escalation, the decision comes as Mogadishu reacts to Israel's recognition of Somaliland, a move Somalia has condemned as illegal and a direct violation of its sovereignty. In practical terms, Mogadishu is signaling that any country or partner that supports or facilitates Somaliland's separation directly or indirectly will face diplomatic and economic consequences, turning Israel's recognition into a broader geopolitical confrontation in the Horn of Africa. From geopolitics to business and industry, Spanish seafood company Nueva Pescanova is preparing to exit Mozambique by selling its local subsidiary Grupo Pescamar along with a fleet of 26 fishing vessels. The decision signals a major retreat from a prawn industry that once ranked among the country's most valuable export sectors. According to reports, the company intends to leave the markets entirely, a step that could further weaken a sector already struggling with depleted stocks and environmental damage. At its peak, prawns generated about $100 million a year for Mozambique, helping to position the country as a key supplier to European and Asian market. However, that success has steadily unraveled as years of overfishing, including frequent breaches of the annual closed season, have sharply reduced prawn populations. Turning now to the broader macroeconomic picture, inflation remained a major economic challenge across Africa in 2025, with several countries experiencing sharply rising consumer prices driven by currency instability, supply-side pressures, and structural economic weaknesses. Global inflation moderated to an average of 4.2% in 2025, holding up better than many analysts expected despite historic U.S. tariff pressures across commodities and supply chains. In the U.S., inflation eased from about 3% in 2024 to approximately 2.7% last year, reflecting broader disinflationary trends in major economies. The IMF projects global inflation could fall further to around 3.7% in 2026, boosted by soft price growth in China and subdued inflation in much of Europe. Despite these gains, Africa tells a different story. Several African economies remained under acute price pressures in 2025, in part due to currency instability, import cost, in conflict and structural supply constraint. Let's take a look at the African currencies with the highest inflation rate last year based on IMF projections and related economic data. Top on the list is South Sudan with 97.5, nearly 100% inflation reflect persistent currency depreciation and heavy import dependence in an economy still wrestling with conflict and weak governance. Second is Zimbabwe with 89.0, contending with a history of monetary instability and efforts to stabilize its currency also saw some of the region's steepest price increases. Next is Sudan with 87.2. Next is Burundi. We have Malawi. Burundi high inflation relates to chronic fiscal imbalances and food insecurity, while Malawi persistent inflation above 20% has fueled social discontent and highlights the challenge of aligning monetary policy with growth objective. Other African economies in the list like Nigeria, Angola, Egypt, Ghana and Zambia experience elevated but comparatively lower inflation influenced by foreign exchange volatility and structural bottlenecks. Taken together, these figures reflect the uneven inflation landscape across Africa in 2025, where several economies struggled with cost of living pressures even as global inflation softened. As we look ahead, the economic dynamics of Africa are taking shape as 2026 begins, with established business figures solidifying their influence. Wealth in Africa continues to be driven by industrial growth, resource exploitation, and energy investment. The economic activities of Africa's affluent individuals contribute significantly to employment and structural developments. These influential figures play vital roles in areas crucial to national security and economic stability. With that context in mind, here are the 5 richest individuals in Africa at the start of 2026. Top on the list is Aliko Dangote with $30.4 billion net worth, and he ranks 80th on the list. He's a Nigerian. Second is Johan Rupe and family with $19.7 billion net worth and the rank 135 on the list. He's a South African, followed by Nikki, who is also a South African, with $14.0 billion net worth, and he ranks 223rd on the list. Fourth is Naguib Sawiris, who has a $10.7 billion net worth, and he ranks globally 326 on the list. He is from Egypt. We also have Abdulsalamad Rabiu, who has $10.4 billion net worth. He ranks 342nd on the global rank, and he is a Nigerian. To food security and trade, Morocco has strengthened its position as one of Africa's most dependable grain importers after completing all its U.S. wheat contracts for the 2025 season without delays or cancellations, setting it apart from many peers grappling with supply chain disruptions. Data from United States Department of Agriculture shows that Morocco received its entire contracted volume of 61,700 tons of U.S. wheat between June and mid-December last year. The USDA described the deliveries as being executed on schedule and in full, a performance that analysts say reflects disciplined logistics, planning and close monitoring of maritime freight movement. Across much of Africa, wheat imports in 2025 were disrupted by port congestion, financing constraints, and volatile shipping costs. Against that backdrop, Morocco is now ranked third on the continent for contract reliability and delivery efficiency for U.S. grain, according to agricultural analysts tracking trade flows. Now, this strategy, combined with reliable execution, is positioning the countries as a reference point for food security management across Africa. We'll take a short break from here. When we return, we'll look at other pressing economic concerns across the continent. Stay with us. This has been African Economy, bringing you inside the matter in Africa's evolving financial landscape. Picking up from the energy sector, the Ghanaian government has announced the full settlement of $1.47 billion in energy sector debt, ending a major financial strain that threatened the country's fiscal stability. President John Mahama's administration, which took office in January 2025, inherited a power sector pushed to the brink of years of unpaid gas supplies from the offshore Cape 3 Point OCTP field. According to a report, the situation had exhausted the $500 million World Bank partial risk guarantee, a critical instrument that had supported nearly $8 billion in private investment through the Sankofa gas project. However, these measures are designed to support consistent nationwide electricity generation while reducing reliance on costly liquid fuels. The government has also renegotiated all independent power producer agreement, paying roughly $393 million in legacy debts during 2025. The move was part of a broader energy sector reset aimed at securing better value for money for Ghanaian consumers and investors alike. According to the Ministry of Finance, the combined payments in 2025 reached $1.47 billion, representing a decisive effort to stabilize the energy sector. In aviation infrastructure, Ethiopia Airlines has kicked off construction of a new $12.5 billion airport in Bishop 2, about 45 kilometers southeast of Addis Ababa, and what officials describe as Africa's largest aviation infrastructure project to date. The state-owned carriers leading the design of the four-runway Bishop 2 International Airport, which Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said will be able to park up to 270 aircraft and handle 110 million passengers a year when it opens in 2030. That is more than 4 times the capacity of the country's current main airport, which is expected to reach saturation within the next 3 years, according to a report. Sidara, a Dubai-based engineering and consulting business, has been contracted to design the airport. According to the company's head of operations, Tariq Al-Khani. Turning now to trade and geopolitics, Kenya has delayed signing a trade agreement with China and pressure from the U.S., citing unidentified people familiar with the matter. According to a report, the proposed pact still requires approval from the Cabinet, Parliament and President William Ruto. The hesitation comes as Nairobi seeks to secure a renewal of its participation in the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, the U.S. trade program that for 25 years allowed qualifying Kenyan export to enter the American market duty-free. The AGOA expired on September 30, 2025, and a long-term successor is yet to be approved by the U.S. Congress. Since the program failed, Kenya's apparel export to the U.S., worth more than $600 million annually, have been hit with tariffs of up to 28%. Finally, in Central Africa, Cameroon's Kribi oil refinery is on track to start partial operations in the second half of 2026, nearly 2 years ahead of the original June 2028 schedule. The initial phase is expected to process 10,000 barrels per day, roughly one-third of its final 30,000 barrel per day capacity, meeting about 22% of national diesel and gasoline demand. The project is projected to reduce fuel import by nearly one-third, easing pressure on foreign exchange reserves and supporting a more stable domestic fuel supply. Preparatory works, including a base camp, are already underway, while full-scale construction is scheduled to begin in January 2026. And that brings us to the end of today's edition of African Economy. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to follow us across all our social media channels at Spectrum TV. Remember, African Economy airs live every Tuesday and Thursday at 2:30 p.m. Until next time, keep thinking growth, keep thinking progress, because this is where Africa's economy speaks. I am Wang Fonabasi Water. Goodbye, Africa.